Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see you all. Thank you for coming to First Pages this morning at Appomattox Regional Governor's School. If you've been here before, I think most of you have. This is our auditorium, and we're really glad to see you here today. This event was made possible by the Arts Literary Arts Boosters. We're really grateful to them. We're really grateful to Mr. Humphreys in the back and his crew for setting all of this up for us so that we sound amazing. And I'm going to introduce our guests, and we'll jump right in because I know if you're a person who submitted a page, you really want to hear what they think. So I'm going to introduce our guests first. Connie Bewald is a writer of fiction. She's been writing stories in an effort to explore human relationships since before she was 5 years old. She's been a teacher and school librarian for more than 40 years, which I don't know how that's possible. She looks very young. Sharing her love of reading and writing with homeschoolers and hundreds of students in public and private schools in the US and Haiti, she is the author of 3 loosely connected novels that comprise the Rivertown trilogy, Bread and Salt, Digging to Indochina, and Roses Take Practice, in addition to the recently published and available here, Truth Like Oil. Our other guest is Mary Helen Sheriff. Here she is. And she's the author of the award-winning Southern women's fiction book, Boop and Eve's Road Trip. She serves as the CEO of Bookish Road Trip and a blogger at The Gift of Story. After 14 years teaching elementary school, middle school, college, and professionals, Mary has taken a break from the classroom to focus on writing. She has an MFA from Hollins University, an MA from Old Dominion University, and a BA from UVA. She lives in Henrico County, Virginia, with her 2 children, 2 cats, and 1 husband. We're really grateful to have both of them here today. Today, reading our selections is a person who I think has a lot of star power. So I would like to introduce to you the chair of the Social Sciences Department at Appomattox Regional Governor's School, Mr. James Stone King.
Hello there. Star Wars fans, that was pathetic. You should know the response. Anyway, so. There you go. So without further ado, Candy Corn Killer. It was Halloween night, and Dave decided to spice things up. He had been given candy corn. He had been giving candy corn to children since trick-or-treating got too old for him. This year, though, he was going to do something fun, something that the kids of Richmond will remember. His evil deed shall be put down in history. He will be forever known as the Candy Corn Killer. What you thinking about, Dave? Emily asks. Her bouncy blonde curls jump around with her bright smile. He secretly rolls my eyes and grimaces at her smile. She's too bright. It's disgusting. Dave had married her due to his mother's constantly nagging about how he needed a wife. Emily had apparently been obsessed with him since his freshman year at high school. She had that cutesy yet psycho vibe to her and had been put in 9 different mental hospitals. It was either her or actually sane girl named Jane. Yuck. Sane people are more disgusting than obsessed ones. Nothing. Do you plant that oleander in your garden? Her smile turns creepy with that one question. And police still say that they have not found any evidence on this mass murder. Due to the small amount of evidence, the police will be shutting down this investigation. Now let us say a silent prayer for the 100 kids who died during this night. The reporters bow their heads and they stay still for a moment. Dave, who's laughing his ass off, takes a sip of his wine. He celebrates his succession in the murderings with a simple glass of wine mixed with a little of his last victim's blood. It's the sweetest he's ever tasted. It was unfortunate that he could not collect some of the children's blood to taste. It would have been even more joyous, but it would have been too much work to hide another body and making sure that it wasn't linked to him. He had settled for the mass murdering instead. Dave sighs and takes another sip of the wine.
Is this on? Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. I'll go first. Good morning. Thank you all so much for having me today. I did want to start by saying that Connie and I know each other just a little bit. But as we go through this, we may not agree on everything, and that's part of the value of having the two of us here. Sometimes writing and stories are part of taste, and so, please know that. And we also don't necessarily know the same things about writing, because writing is a lifelong craft to learn, and so I think the things that we agree on might be particularly important to note, because it's probably resonating the same way with both of us, but if you hear things that are different, that's a learning opportunity too. So I just thought I might start by saying that.
Actually, before you talk about the piece, maybe I want to say something.
Sure.
So I want to say that I have edited for a number of literary magazines, and I know you probably know this already, but the sheer volume of things that come through making a powerful first page like super, super, super important. So when I was doing that job, unless certain things were true, which we'll be talking about, I'm sure, I would not go further. So that's the context for this. I want to be really honest. And also, I really want to compliment everybody who put things in, because I think it's really scary to put your stuff out there like this. So,
Yeah.
Great. Good job.
I've had the experience of doing something very similar to this, and I know my stomach was in knots while they were talking about my work. So, I appreciate that. So the first one, the Candy Corn Killer, I wanted to start by talking about the character of Dave, who I think is a really fascinating and complex character. I see some real humor in him, but he's also a sicko, and that's kind of a fun juxtaposition there. In fact, he's fascinating enough that I wondered if this wouldn't be stronger if it was in the first person, because we're kind of in his head anyway, and it felt like that might actually be an easier way to do it, and more powerful even, kind of bringing out his character and his voice even more. I wondered about starting it. So the first paragraph is kind of backstory, and I wondered if the line, "Do you still plant that oleander in your garden?" is a really compelling beginning. And so I wondered if it couldn't start us in the scene and the backstory be sort of eased in instead of that being up front. I really like the title. Candy Corn Killer is clever, and I think it also fits in with some of the tone of the story. So I think it's unique and original. So I really liked that. And over to you.
Well, this is one that we agree on a lot. I also marked that line, do you still plant that oleander in your garden? And I think you said it really well. It feels to me like in the second, it's in the beginning, it's kind of an information dump kind of thing, and I'd rather just be with Dave and Emily and seeing the scene, I guess. And murdering of 100 kids is a very big deal, so that is some plot to work with right there.
Yeah.
And just a real note, if it seems like I'm stumbling on some of the words, it's because I'm reading it word for word. So if the words don't if grammar doesn't make sense sometimes, I'm reading it word for word. So there you go. Don't shoot the messenger. Okay, so Magic in Seattle, Scene 1. I'll tell you what's wrong, Aiden. Look at this lead right here. 50 years ago, in 2072, United States Senator Andrew Cleveland wrote a bill for freedom of celestial powers and beings. Then you just go on to give a whole history lesson on how people just became magical and flew away one day. Mr. Seamers held Aiden's own story up to him. Aiden didn't want to look at it, though. He knew what it said. Mr. Lowe, I'm sorry to say, but I'm not going to run it in this week's paper. Why, sir? Aiden asked, although he already knew the answer. Aiden already knew the story was subpar, but he took the punishment and let Mr. Seamers ridicule him. It was best just to let the boss get his frustrations out. Because there's nothing newsworthy here. This isn't really an update on the magical Al-Du Assam, now is it? You just kind of read a 7th grade history textbook and tried to publish it in the paper. Mr. Seamers rubbed his head in frustration. It must have been a long day for him, too. I really expected more from you, Aiden, I'm sorry to say. I understand, sir, said Aiden. Now it was explaining time. I guess I just had a hard time finding any new information. The Celestials aren't one for exposure. There just isn't any more information about them. None that I could find this week anyway. I guess I just defaulted to what we already know. I worked with what was available to me, but maybe I should have looked harder. Mr. Seamers leaned forward, supporting himself with his elbows on the desk. No, Aiden, you've been looking hard. I think you've just reached the extent of the information already available. It's time for you to go on the field, get your hands dirty, and find out what's happening with Celestials and magic right now, not what happened 50 years ago.
Thank you. So in this one, what I really like is that we're oriented right away. The 50 years ago in 2072 United States Senator, we know the time where we are now. We know that this Aiden works for a paper. We know the relationship with the boss. So I feel very oriented and interested in that right away. And by the end of the page, something is really happening. We know he's going to go out and do this thing. So I really like that. I think the dialogue, which I think is basically, again, easy to read, fine, could be more condensed and more fragmented and more realistic, kind of. So I don't think you need quite all of that, but I think it moves and it's an interesting situation.
I have some different opinions this time. I thought the dialogue was very realistic. I think it captured well how people talk. I do agree, though, it could have been condensed. But I think I liked how you could see the power dynamic going on there in that conversation. I also liked that from the very beginning I was oriented in where we were and when we were, and that was helpful and made it less confusing. I did think, though, this book is set far in the future. I'm wondering whether we would have a weekly paper far in the future. And then I'm also wondering if there's ways to make this feel a little bit more futuristic and kind of capture that a little bit better with some odd things that are in the room or that kind of thing. And then, I mean, it's the future, so the rules can be totally different, but as I'm sitting here thinking, like, in workplaces these days, outside of schools, we don't generally call people Mr. and Mrs., so at first I was feeling like Aiden was a student, and Mr. Seamers was like this teacher who was running the newspaper. By the end, I realized that was not the case, that this was like, these were grown-ups, and again, I don't know what the manners are in this year, so maybe that's just how they do it, but it jarred me just a little bit because my 2021 self was kind of putting us in a school newspaper at first. At the end, I did want to turn the page. I was very much thinking, ooh, I wonder what's going to happen on Aiden's trip. It was a compelling launch into what I think is going to be quite an adventure.
Houses in motion. I'm getting a headache, I think. I can feel it starting, forming right around my temples and spreading to the back of my head. I can't decipher the root cause. Is it the pulse-pounding trap music that's surrounding me on all sides? The heat everybody in this house is generating? The constant half-shout conversation surrounding me about the new year? Or the clacking of the billiard balls against one another as my friends play strip pool? Well, whatever it is, I need out. I feel my pockets for a loose cigarette. No luck in my left, no luck in my right. I tap Zell on the shoulder to ask if I can bum one. Yo. He lines up another shot and sends the 14 into the left corner pocket. Do you have a cigarette? Nah. You've got one behind your ear, though, he says, with a motion indicating which ear. I do? I reach my hand up and feel behind my left ear. So I do. Well, gents, While I'd love to stick around and see Jamie's Vic girth be unleashed, I think I'll take my leave. Hurry back, Zell says with a grin. We bump forearms and I duck out of the crowd surrounding me. The basement is densely packed with all the youth, degenerate or otherwise, of Okaga. You can barely breathe without taking in BO or breath that would make a breathalyzer scream in agony and kill itself. I push and jostle my way out of the basement before getting up into the living room. Up here, it's even more obvious that this is not a sanctioned party by any means. There's writing on the walls, solo cups strewn, and substances of various legalities being consumed all around. There's a group on the couch who are playing Smash Bros. On a flat screen. Above my head, I hear squeaking and moans that would put Riley to shame.
I loved the sensory details in this page. I loved the clacking of the billiard balls, and we even have smell, which is often a neglected sense in writing. So the breath, you can barely breathe without taking in BO. That was also a really compelling sensory detail that's in here. I thought the dialogue was really well done in terms of it is very realistic. It expresses some real character, but I kind of wanted it to have more of a function than that. You might really have this conversation in real life, but in stories, typically the dialogue is going to move the plot forward a little bit, and this just feels like an unimportant conversation. Minus the fact that it does reveal character, and it is really well written. So maybe figuring out some way to have some conflict in that, or to start the plot a little bit. I don't know what this is going to be about. I loved the humor in the piece. There were quite a few places where I laughed. And I think maybe the most compelling thing here is the voice, and I think that this has a really strong voice, and it's one of the most nebulous and hard things to capture. And so it's quite impressive that it's here, and the voice alone would have me keep reading.
Yeah, I agree with the sensory image comment. I agree with the dialogue comment. I really agree with what you say. I think for me, even though I agree that the voice is strong, I would like to have a little more sense of who's talking. I don't know if maybe one of the people that the narrator's talking to could, the cigarette behind the ear when you're asking for one, when he's asking for one, that's a telling detail. But I wonder if there could be yet one more thing, just so I have more of a sense of who the narrator is faster.
Yeah, and even like the person calling him by his name, like if Zell called the narrator by his name, now we'd know who the named character's name is,
Yes.
which is just kind of helpful in grounding. Yeah.
Untitled novel, how original. I could feel a Mortius lurking behind one of those dilapidated doors like a crazy-ass old woman. Its presence never failed to leave a metallic, bloody taste in my mouth and make every muscle, tendon, ligament, bone, and whatever else held my body together want to turn around and run away. I couldn't just leave, though. I had to retrieve Sebastian Wilson, Queen's orders. My stomach flipped like one of those acrobats I saw doing a show when I went with Dahlia as I stopped outside of apartment 3C. Out of all the places in Richmond, and Sebastian lived here? The wood protested with every step I took. The doors looked like they barely hold up against a mild winter, and the walls were paper thin. I'd heard several interesting things on the walk up. He'd always aspired higher. Maybe he'd changed in the 3 Earth years since I left him. The time difference boggled my mind. 5 Elamarian years for 1 Earth year? What wacko making up the universe decided that would be a good idea? Damn it, I didn't want to do this. You're best suited for the retrieval lark, Queen Laria had said, bent over the map of Elamaria, stretched out on a long wooden table. It was a map we'd hopefully get to dispose of soon, a quarter of it colored with a gray crayon filched from one of the castle children's art supplies in order to represent the place's darkness had settled. Permanent night. Your Highness, you know I hate it when you call me that. Laria, he's going to freak out, I had replied, fiddling with the hilt of my sword. Really, why send me? I could never say it out loud, but that was stupid. Forget what I did to Sebastian. He and I couldn't go a day without an argument when we were together. With all due respect, I don't believe I'm the best suited, though. I appreciate your praise. Laria clucked her tongue and shook her head, casual as she knocked over a pawn for her own amusement. So formal. You're retrieving him. End of story.
Okay, I'll start. I think we have a pattern going here. Again, there's much to admire here. I started, and I'm interested right away in what a mortius is, and you ground it enough by comparing it with using the simile of the crazy ass old woman, and the sensory image of a metallic bloody taste in the mouth is good. I feel like there's a missed opportunity with, I heard several interesting things on the walk up. I feel like you could there have put snippets of what the character heard that could be relevant and revealing and orienting. I thought the detail about the 15 the years versus Earth years is interesting. Tells me something. I wondered about, and it's clear that this person's being sent on this mission. That part's all clear. I felt like the dialogue near the end, he's going to freak out, why send me, forget what I did to Sebastian. It confused me. I think something is important is being said there that the writer wants us to know, but I was very confused by that. But it sounds, oh, and one other thing is in the beginning, the stomach flipping metaphor, simile, is, for me, very complicated. I got a little lost in that, too. And I think that's the gist.
Good. I agree with that. So yes, opening line is really strong. I thought that you did a nice job of letting me know that we're going to have two worlds here, and one is El Maria, and the other is the place I'm familiar with, and that was good. I thought that one of the ways that was done well was through language, and having some beings like Amortius and was helpful to help me, understand that there's going to be some magical realism type things, or maybe they're aliens. It's a little unclear, but that's okay. That's fine. There's a lot of mystery in this page, and there are a lot of things I'm left wondering about, and I think that some of that is good. I think leaving some of these, like, I want to read further to help understand this better is good, but it was a little bit overwhelming, and maybe there's some things I'm wondering about that I don't need to wonder about. Like, I'm wondering about the gender of this character, and the only reason that really matters to me is I'm trying to figure out whether this problem this character has with Sebastian is like they're like ex-boyfriend and girlfriend, or if they're brothers, or if they're, like what is that relationship? What's going on there? And so anyway, and it would also help me to picture this person, because I feel like this person could be male or female, and so that's one thing that I was kind of wondering about that I thought, but maybe I don't need to wonder about that. Like also the interesting things, like I think the implication is that they're like maybe rude or maybe they're inappropriate, and that's why it just went with interesting things. But maybe what this person finds interesting would be revealing about this character. So I think that there's that to think of too. So anyway,
I also want to say the mention of Dahlia in the first paragraph. Dahlia better matter a lot in the story. If you're mentioning a character in the first paragraph, it should be someone who's going to matter. So hopefully Dahlia is.
Yeah, that actually threw me too, because there was another thing I was wondering about, and it's okay if I'm wondering about her and she's super important, but if she's just a random name to throw in there, yeah, that is something that doesn't need to be wondered about. point.
The dawn of dark and light. 00, and the darkness came to stay. Milena reached out to hold the darkness in her open hand, tugging the small shred of it she felt in the corners of the room towards her. She expanded the energy and took over the room with a new kind of light. When she opened her eyes, the once brightly lit room was gone. Nothing but the darkness remained, her darkness. The tiny candles her mother had put in the room earlier hadn't dimmed or faded. The light simply wouldn't penetrate through the darkness. In her mind, Milena heard the names Evangeline used to call her and fought to remain in control of the darkness. She had to keep it confined to the single room instead of letting it roam free like it wanted. I should put it back, Milena thought to herself, and closed her eyes once more. She pictured pushing the darkness away from herself, shrinking it, and letting it fall back into the corners until it wanted to be brought out again. But when she opened her eyes, the darkness was still there, still covering the room, altering her ability to see. This couldn't be happening. Milena had been controlling it so well. She'd brought it out and held it for longer than she had ever tried to. But now that it was out, it didn't want to go back in. It wanted Milena to release her grip on it, to let the darkness fly away into the world. It wanted to be unshackled from its bindings and free from the cage it was kept in. Milena, her mother shouted, heels clicking loudly on the wooden floor. Panicked, Milena tries once more to shove the darkness back into its corner, back into the cage. She took care to keep her hand closed tightly, afraid that if it were to open the slightest bit, the darkness would escape. Milena's breaths came out in terrified gasps. Her mother was going to be angry. There was no telling what she might do if she found out about Milena using her ability. This time, when Milena peeled her eyes open, the room was back to how it was before. There was no sign of it ever changing, no sign of Milena using her powers whatsoever. She sighed with relief. Milena fell to her knees. The terror in her heart began to fade into fatigue. The pale gray carpet beneath her feels soft and warm, more loving than any embrace she'd ever been given before.
So I thought this was really well done in terms of being very visceral. I felt like we were with the main character. We could feel what she was feeling. There was a lot of description. There's conflict already on the first page, which I think is a really strong way to open. I like the fact that not only is she struggling with, I'm going to call it magic, but I'm not entirely sure that's what it is, but struggling with this magic or this power, but also like she's not supposed to use it, and her mom's gonna come in and she's gonna be in trouble, and that's a lot of things coming together that make this very compelling. I think my suggestions are smaller scale. There are a few places I think where you change verb tense. It's easy enough to fix, but that's one thing to try to make sure you keep consistent. A question about point of view. So obviously we're in Milena's head, which is great. We also, though, are finding out about what the darkness wants, and so it wanted to be unshackled from its bindings and free from the cage it was kept in. Typically, you would not know what anyone other than your point of view character wants. However, what I'm not sure of here is that if this is like some sort of psychic power, perhaps she is able to know what this thing wants, and it's not really a point of view shift. Anyway, I'm just not sure. So I guess it's okay if that's the intention. If the intention is that she has a psychic power and can feel this presence and knows what it wants and can communicate with it psychically, then that works the way it is. If that's not the case, then we don't want to know, we can't know what the darkness wants from Milena's point of view. So that may or may not be something to fix.
Yeah, with this piece, I'm struck by what Helen, what you said last time about things to wonder about that maybe you don't need to wonder about. I feel on this page, I'm wondering a little too much about it, and I think it could be made clearer what's happening and nothing would be lost. I'm intrigued by the relationship. I I like the human elements in this, like the darkness as a metaphor for whatever, mental health, emotional feelings, and the relationship with the mom. So that's what grabs me the most in here. I like that that's embedded in a they call it, fantasy, science fiction-y type of story. But to me, I wish some of it was made a little more clear.
The Dragon's Shadow. Intro. Someone, somewhere out there. Grand General Onata, leader of the southern regions and ruler of the skies for billions, sat at his desk overlooking Henrijo Square on Zendon. He had many nicknames: the snake, the bulldog, but most importantly, the dragon. He quite liked that one, given to him by a group of black market smugglers, an ex-Incos faction that he had hunted down. An old-fashioned nickname, but one that still imposed fear, but yet spoke of a traditional time. He was a trader, a diplomat, a tactician, but he preferred to think of himself as a loyalist to humanity's biggest cause, freedom. Freedom that had been stripped away by the galactic governments, sequestering and controlling the galaxy until every star had a flag and every moon had a base. Onita despised them for this. Their self-assumed role of the galaxy was without the consent of the people. He had worked harder than any politician, dictator, governor to earn his position, yet he understood that without a proper rattling of the galaxy, he'd be advancing no further. And he wanted to advance further. The Operation Becketh had failed, but his grander plan would still advance. He had a fleet, a legion of loyal officers, and a galaxy to conquer. He had stumbled, but he would not fall. That was the job for other governments. By all technicalities, he was still employed by the Zendon government, but he had long ago mentally signed his resignation. His true loyalties lay only with himself and the cause to free the galaxy of lazy governments. He understood that the only way to bring down a wall was a hammer, chaos to order, but he himself was not chaotic. He was orchestrative in his moves. Each strike, each political rise, every chess game he won on the sidelines, all of it would lead to his greater plan, and then the stars would be his.
A lot becomes clear here, I think. There's a lot of information in this opening. I really like a lot of the writing. I love the nicknames, is revealing of character there. My wondering about this is it's really hard to particularly start a piece in someone's head. And I feel here's this general, and what's he really doing in the scene? He's sitting at his desk overlooking a square. And then after that, it's all about him or in his head. And I think there's a way this writer could get more into action faster, or even if someone comes in and talks to him, or just get us in the scene more to reveal some of this information. And I don't even think you probably need all this information so soon on the first page. And one very specifics I thought of were the last paragraph about he understood the only way to bring down the wall was the hammer, chaos to order, but he himself was not chaotic. That seems really interesting to me and very important in revealing something about this character. So if there were a way to reveal that, like even earlier, I know it's only the first page and it's asking a lot, but that could work, could help. Maybe that could be shown in an interaction with someone coming in. And my other thought was, I can't even read my own writing here. If there were more specifics, it seems kind of general to say, the cause to free the galaxy of lazy governments. I mean, the more specifics that you can fit in around that, like what are they doing? Freedom, that's a big idea. what are these, what's happening? Even one example of like what's happening that he's objecting to would be helpful.
I agree with all of that. I think that the writing is very crisp. I think it's very clear. This writer shows great grammatical control, and it's very smooth. I think this is maybe another way of looking at this same thing that Connie is saying, is that this feels more like a character study than a scene. It's a beautifully done character story and an interesting character, but a scene typically has action at least. So I also would encourage this writer to have something happening in the opening scene especially, and maybe some of those things could be revealed. This information, which all feels important and strong, could be sprinkled in, maybe in the opening scene, maybe even later. Like, it doesn't all have to be right up front. But sometimes as a writer, I know it's important to have this information in my head before I can write that scene. So it, sometimes as an exercise of understanding who I'm writing about, it's actually really helpful to do a character study like this first. Love the rhythm and the cadence of this. This writer does a lot with using long sentences and short sentences and long paragraphs and short paragraphs. I can tell that they have a really strong idea of the cadence that readers really like. So, and the ending line is awesome. And then the stars be his. I thought that was a really awesome way to end the first page. So.
All right, so. Los recuerdos de la estación de tren. Andre Johnson is waiting on the bench in the middle of the train station 5 minutes from his house. He's wearing a black Nike hoodie like he does every day the weather allows him to. The car keys clipped to his pant loop jingle as he scoots his body down against the bench and lies his head back, enjoying the pleasant fall afternoon. Andre closes his eyes and lets the sound paint the station in his mind. This is exactly what his brother Chris had told him not to do. A smile grows on Andre's face as he focuses on the noises around him. He hears 2 children to his left. He doesn't know that they are adorable 6-year-old twins. The sister had 2 afro puffs with blue beads that matched her dress and jelly slip-on shoes. The brother had on jeans, white sneakers, and a shirt the same baby blue as his sister's beads and dress. Andre knows they are competing against each other, and their voices ping-ponging the phrase, "Look, look, I can do it better." The twins are trying to best each other by twirling for as long as they can, while the other keeps count of how many seconds they last. The sister is mad that her brother counts much slower than she does. He drags out the Mississippi behind every number, making her only reach 5 seconds. He got to 9.5. Behind Andre to the right, there's a man and a woman talking in Spanish. The woman, Ellie, in gray sweatpants and stained hoodie and Ugg boots. She couldn't find enough reason to look nice today. When Ellie woke up this morning, she decided to put all of her energy into saying goodbye to her boyfriend. He, on the contrary, made an effort to look nice because his next stop was his new apartment, where he will meet his new roommates. Ellie hugs her boyfriend so tightly he can barely breathe. They are both crying, and neither of them try to hide it from other people in the station. Their crying makes Andre uncomfortable, so he listens for another conversation. Before he loses complete focus from the couple, he hears Ellie say, "Te voy a estrangular."
I think that the writer does a nice job of noticing details and talking about what people are wearing and what the weather is. And I really like the car keys clipped to this pant loop jingle as he scoots his body down the bench. Like, that was very strong detail right there. I was a little confused as I was reading this, and I guess what I wasn't sure of is things having to do with point of view and what's important. So typically in modern writing, and this is not true for some of the classics you all probably read in your English classes, but typically in modern writing, we don't have an omniscient point of view. And so typically you would, this is Andre's point of view, so the things he can't see, we wouldn't see. It's jarring when I can see things he can't. Now, there might be a reason to do an omniscient point of view, and maybe it is very important that I know what these 6-year-olds look like. My guess is that it isn't, and if it isn't, then you're jarring me for no good reason. I think the second grouping of people, again, you're telling me a lot about what Elle is thinking and what she did, and it's really interesting. It's very compelling. I think it's interesting how Elle doesn't look good because of one reason and her boyfriend does for a different reason. It's all very interesting, but when I'm in Andre's point of view, I wouldn't know those things. So what you've done is given an omniscient point of view, and it is a real writing technique, but it is not as common in modern literature. And I guess I would just caution you to do it only if you. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, I also noticed that, and was going to say those same things, and then in hearing it again now, hearing it and thinking about it, I wonder if what the author might be trying to do is, because what stood out to me with my biggest wondering on this was the part about he closes his eyes and lets the sound paint the station in his mind. Sound, paint the station in his mind. This is exactly what his brother Chris had told him not to do. So that seems really important to me. If it's not important, it shouldn't it shouldn't be in here, because that really grabbed me. It just seemed so unusually placed. And so then I thought to myself, maybe he has some power where he gets into other people's points of view. And if that's the case, then I feel like the man and woman talking in Spanish, maybe there's a reason, like he's in that point of view.
Yeah, that could be.
But even if that's true, it's written in kind of a confused way and needs a little work. And the children, that is beautiful writing. I love that paragraph so much about the children. And even keeping in mind what I just sort of realized might be the case, unless they're really going to matter, I don't think this is the place for them on the first page. I think that could be used in another piece of writing, because it's gorgeous. It could almost even be a little flash fiction, piece somehow. But
And another theory I just came up with is that maybe this is what he's picturing. Like he's hearing things and it's creating this image in his head, which also can work. I just needed to say that. I do that in airports. I make up stories about people, and maybe that's what this guy's doing, but it's a little unclear.
Untitled fantasy novel. I push at the dark wooden door, hoping for it to swing open. It falls forward and lands on the grass with a thump. It seems the hinges were damaged upon our arrival. I stared down at it for a moment, wondering if it would be acceptable to leave it unfixed. It is a personal principle to try and leave things as unaffected by my presence as possible. I turned to look at what used to be the two of the people residing in the house. They are not moving. Perhaps it is a little late for leaving this place unaffected. How troubling. I wonder if she, who feels a fondness for humanity that so greatly contrasts my indifference, would be more concerned. My bare feet cause the wood to creak underneath me as I cross the door to step out onto the grass. I pull air into my lungs, causing them to feel uncomfortably full. However full they feel, the air inside of them is fresh. The cottage is surrounded by thick trees. "You're going to leave it?" a condescending voice rings out from behind me. Its source, a small hovering ball of faint white light. "You could easily put it back." "You could just as easily," I sigh. The door has no effect on any of the people living here, as there are no longer any people living here. That's unnecessarily cold, and in case you haven't noticed, I don't have hands. It is now directly in front of my face, obscuring my view of our surroundings. I swat at it. You would be much more useful if you did, a fact. You'd be a lot more useful if you did what I told you to do, not a fact. Now put the door back, something that is not going to happen. Stepping past the small hindrance that it continues to accompany me after all this time, I cast my gaze upwards towards the night sky.
Am I? Who's first? Me or her? Is anyone keeping track? Oh, that's okay. Okay, great. I felt like I talked a lot the last time, so I thought I would go first. Okay, so this is a first-person piece, obviously, and I think, and it's a very intriguing situation. For me, it really starts to move when the dialogue happens with the voice. I think I like the dialogue a lot. I think it's like both funny and strange, and I think for the voice it would be stronger if there was less passive, it was more active, and I think the writer could look at this really carefully and make sure that, you know, the wood creaks underneath my feet, my bare feet, really was ruthless at looking at the language and got rid of cause and is and that kind of thing. But I think it's a very intriguing situation, and I really like this dialogue between a small hovering ball of faint white light and the person. It's very intriguing.
I think that I like the fact that there's a lot of there's conflict in this initial opening, and there's multiple layers of that conflict, because you have the conflict of the main character internally on, like, gosh, do I fix this door or not fix this door? Which is also interesting because he seems more focused, as does the white ball, on whether or not to fix the door than on dealing with the fact that he, I think, just killed 2 people. So that's an interesting juxtaposition of what he cares about and what he doesn't care about. I was curious, and it may be okay that I was curious, but it was maybe a little bit confusing. I wonder if she, who feels a fondness for humanity that so greatly contrasts my indifference, would be more concerned. And then I wondered if that light condescending ball was that she. So that was maybe just a little, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to be making that connection or not making that connection. And along those lines, I also think the dialogue is clever and funny, and that humor is also really coming through here in his internal thoughts and in that dialogue. But it was mildly confusing, because he says you could do so just as easily, and then she doesn't have any hands, and I guess maybe if it was taken down a notch and it was just like, you do it, versus you could do it easily. I think it's the easily that's throwing me off, because, like, obviously he knows she doesn't have hands, and so, like, if it's more of a toss-off, like, oh, you do it, and then, well, duh, I don't have any hands. I think that, I don't know, it's a small thing, but it confused me. Like, why would he say that if she doesn't have hands? Does she have magical powers? Maybe there's a way she can do it, but then it seems like she can't. So I think I spent too much time thinking about it. And maybe that wasn't the intention. I liked the little a fact, not a fact. I thought that was clever and funny, and it gave us, like, sort of the internal thoughts of the person. So yeah, I love the conflict that started here.
Another untitled fantasy novel. In an act of brazen idiocy, Douglas Colt decided it would be a good idea to dive headfirst off the roof of the Wells Public Library at exactly 4:56 p.m. on June 4th, 1961, fracturing his skull and collapsing the bones in his neck. The precise angle at which he hit the concrete granted him a much quicker death than his infantile grasp over the subject should have earned him. It took 25 minutes for the lady who owned the shop across the street to notice. Back then, it was a flower shop. The green-tinted vase containing the newest spring arrangements to set out front slipped from her hands and shattered on the sidewalk. When the ambulance arrived 18 minutes later, a paramedic crossed the road and helped her sweep up the shards. The man had already been pronounced dead after all. There was nothing they could do. This all went far outside Douglas's plan for the day. He makes sure to let me know each time he tells the story. He was the kind of man whose ideal death would be a spectacle. He'd draw emotion from passers-by, see them weep as he fell, beautiful and tragic like something he could never quite capture in his art, but he failed. He died as he lived, ignored and forgotten. And now it's my problem. Douglas is very talkative and unuseful, I've found. He laments his life and death to anyone who will listen, and I'm the only one who can, so he laments it to me. It's hard to read with his theatrical voice droning in the background. It's even harder to read when the clock reaches 4:56 and the building plunges into darkness until 5:39.
I think this is a particularly strong opening paragraph. I like the kind of tone of it, and it's just, describing someone diving headfirst and also calling it brazen idiocy is an interesting and eye-catching opening sentence. So well done there. I am wondering about some things. I think I'm supposed to wonder about them, and I think it's fine that I do, but I'll tell you what I'm wondering about just in case it isn't what I'm supposed to be wondering about. It really gets towards the end of the page. This is the only person who can hear him. So, okay, Douglas is talking to this person. Douglas is dead. They're in heaven? No, probably not if he's the only one who can hear him. And the person who's narrating is also reading a book in wherever this place is that's after death. And I'm also wondering why the building plunged into darkness after this guy died, and then why it came back on a little bit later. So anyway, those are things I'm wondering about, and it may be 100% fine that I'm wondering about those things if that's the intention of the author, but I thought I would share them in case that wasn't what I was supposed to be wondering about. I also think that the lines, "He died as he lived, ignored and forgotten," is very poignant, and following it by, "and now it's my problem." Douglas is very talkative and very unuseful, I've found, is really funny. So that little trio there really struck me as a neat progression of thought.
Yeah, I was very intrigued by this piece. I feel like I know what it was saying. I mean, it felt really clear to me, but I could be wrong, so I'll tell you what I think it was. I'm wondering who the narrator is, definitely, but it's not bothering me yet.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. What I was wondering about wasn't bothering me yet, but yeah.
And I felt like to make it strong, to me this is very strong. And to make it stronger, I would get rid of the sentence, this is picky, but "the precise angle at which he hit the concrete granted him a much quicker death." I felt like wordy and not that necessary. And the rest of it, I thought, was just such an interesting flow, like punctuated in this really strong way. Like you're reading along about the vase and then this all went far outside of Douglas's plans for the day. Like, wow, he makes sure to let me know each time he tells the story. What? I thought he was dead, but I really like that. And then, again, but he failed, he lived, and then it's my problem. He's talkative. So I thought what I'm picturing is happening and is that this guy is somehow a ghost in the real world with the narrator. And I thought that was very funny. It's hard to read with his theatrical voice droning in the background. to me, that felt like a habitual reading. Like when the person's reading, this ghost is bugging them. You know, the ghost is bugging, or whoever the narrator is, all the time. So I was very, very intrigued by this. And the 456, I assumed, referred back to the death, right? So is this ghost doing tricky things, like at that time every day, turning the lights off or whatever? So that's how I read it, and I felt grounded and intrigued in just the right amounts.
If we didn't get to your page, I'm sorry, but we are out of time. I hope that you will, if you submitted, give yourself a hand. But if you would also give a hand to Mr. Sturgeon and to our wonderful guests who are here today. So I'm going to try to help everybody get to the right next place. If you signed up for horror writing, it is on the 3rd floor. Raise your hand if you know where the 3rd floor is and it's where you're going. Perfect. If you have never been here before and you need to go to the 3rd floor, hold your hands up again. Follow those people. They will be going to the 3rd floor. To the 2nd floor, I will be going, and Connie will be going because she has a session there. Finn, I have a list of the people signed up for horror writing that I need you to pick up. If you're not going to one of those 2 sessions, you can also go to the auditorium. There are books for sale there. There are used books for sale for $1. There are new books. Oh yes, you know, we're in the auditorium. Yesterday, I said in front of everyone that this event was from 6 to 10. It's not. Connie's book is there. We didn't have, yours didn't come in time. But if you would like to buy Connie's book, I'll bet she'd sign it for you. Our guests who are coming later in the day, Roscoe Burnham's, Poet Laureate of Richmond, and Maggie Seawater have books for sale there too. Both of them will be signing also, if you'd like to get a really cool gift for yourself or someone else. The other thing you can do, the food truck should be out there. You can't eat in the auditorium, but you can eat outside anywhere else as long as you're staying away from other people who are not in your pod. Everybody good? Thank you so much for coming. Extra hand for all these folks.